Welcome back. What are some examples of Islamic concepts that can be incorporated into the classroom curriculum itself? On our show today, we'll focus on this very question with Maksud and Ibrahim, founder and educators of Activaql.ca. Let's hear their thoughts on how education and Islam can work alongside and in alignment with one another.
The Quran is read by millions of people across the globe. It's a book of ancient wisdom with modern relevance. Get a copy of the Quran and find out why it has lasting, universal appeal. Visit our website, QuranSpeaks.com, and click on the free Quran link.
Ibrahim, Maksud, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having us.
So we're talking about Islamic education today and incorporating that. So my question to you guys is, why is it important to incorporate Islam within a curriculum as opposed to leaving it as a separate subject in and of itself? So Ibrahim, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, I mean, our Prophet came to teach, right? So to even have this kind of separation where we're like, okay, we're going to have secular education and then religious education as two separate spheres, you're already setting up a Muslim youth to think in a very schizophrenic way, right? And we see something that happened within Christianity that's very much along this lines, where instead of being an integrated whole, instead of having, in a sense, a tawheed of one's worldview, right? What you had was a kind of dichotomy where it was like reason versus revelation, where it was, very much pitted against one another, right? And then that creates a kind of tension. So if you look at the vast majority of Christians today, I'm not saying all of them, but the vast majority, this kind of tension exists. And we're seeing it quickly emerge within the Muslim community, where you have kids going to university, right? And they're encountering ideas for the first time, and they have nothing to measure that up against. And the reason is because they weren't taught it. Even in the elementary and high school levels, what's happening is we're basically taking an entirely secular paradigm, and then we're just adding Islam in as like one subject. And we're saying, okay, yeah, you have an Islamic studies class or maybe Quran or whatever it is, but the rest of it, Islam has nothing to say.
So what would you guys say to someone watching our show? And, we have a lot of Islamic teachers, and my husband himself is an Islamic school teacher. And what if people like them say, well, guess what? We're trying to do things differently, and we aren't doing this. How would you guys respond to that? What has been your experience with sort of looking at the schooling system here, particularly Islamic schools?
Well, the thing is, first of all, even if we look at historically, the division between secular subjects and Islamic sciences was very superficial. For example, Jabir bin Hayyan, Ibn Sina, they were Islamic scholars, but also they've mastered sciences like physics, medicine, and so on. Even today, when you travel to Tunisia or Iraq, you will see that astronomical observatories were built within the premises of the mosques. So today, it's just that people because of Islamophobia in the media and Islam being presented as a regressive religion, people need to pay attention that we have a very rich intellectual heritage, and we can present that heritage in all fields, in sciences, economics, international relations, philosophy, sociology. And this is something we need to present in classroom to children, especially going in the West, where a lot of youth growing up here, because of the Islamophobia bombarded through the media, they have a sort of almost a kind of an inferiority complex. What does our religion has to offer? And yes, we have a lot to offer in terms of philosophy and so on, but we also have a lot to offer in terms of science, economics, finance. I mean, Islamic banking today is one of the growing sectors in the world. So we have to bring this richness in tangible, practical way into the classroom.
So give me an example. What is a tangible way of, incorporating Islam into, one of the courses?
Yeah, so for example, let's say I teach economics sometimes, and let's say you are teaching scarcity and you want to present the concept of scarcity to your students. You would teach it just like in any other normal secular environment. And there is a famous dialysis machine exercise where you have, let's say, a dialysis machine and you have 15 patients with certain requirements, but you can only give it to 10. So the students have to come up with a justification of why 10 can have to get it, who those 10 are. Now we would, let's say, do the same exercise, but the students would have to justify and explain their decisions within the Quran and Sunnah. So what does that do to a student? It automatically builds an understanding that Islam has a take on all these issues, on economics, scarcity, and so on.
So that's, economics is an example, I think, that you can understand, you can relate religion to. But what about humanistic subjects, like, I don't know, English, for example? How do you incorporate English into
Well, just to tag
religion?
on to what he was saying earlier, in terms of your question of what about teachers who are already trying to do something differently?
Yeah.
The reality of Islamic schools today is that the vast majority are underfunded, their staff is overworked, they're being underpaid, they're under a lot of stress, and I'm not saying all of them, right, but for the vast majority of teachers, they don't have the time or qualifications to actually incorporate an Islamic subject into the subject that they teach, because they themselves got their degree at a secular institution, right? And so, and that's not an attack or anything like that on them. But this is just the reality. My sister herself is an Islamic school teacher, and this is what she told me when I asked her, okay, why aren't you teaching this from an Islamic point of view? She's like, where am I supposed to find the Islamic point of view, right? And I don't have the time to do it anyway, right?
Yeah.
So, we feel their struggle, right? And what we're trying to do is to help bridge that gap of what they're trying to do, and to make that easier for them, to reduce the preparation time, to do things like that, and to also incorporate the Islamic perspective. Now, I'll give you an example that I would pose to, let's say, an Islamic school teacher. I say, okay, let's say you're teaching history, right? In high school, grade 9, or grade 10, you have to learn World War I.
Yeah.
What is the Islamic perspective on World War I?
I have no idea.
Right, and the vast majority of people teaching that subject also would have no idea.
Yeah.
But for example, what we learned in World War I is, World War I was caused by nationalism and the arms race and alliances, and they give these 4 causes. Okay, where is the hand of God in history? We as Muslims, we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We believe Allah is musabbib al-asbab, the cause of all causes. Right? This is something that there is a theological agreement across the board.
Yeah.
Now, if God is the cause of all causes, and we have explicit passages in the Quran, for example, where God talks about inflicting punishment or humiliation on those who are corrupt and who disobey Him and who ignore divine commands and even basic morality, and then Him exalting people who obey Him and who follow Him and so forth. We have to look at, okay, well, World War I happened. What is the significance of the fall of the caliphate, of the Ottoman Caliphate? What led to that fall from an Islamic perspective? If you actually look at the history, the Ottoman Caliphate started replacing the Sharia in the, I believe it's in the 1840s. They started replacing the Sharia, and within 100 years the Caliphate fell. Right? We as Muslims have to see a direct causal connection to that when you try to secularize Islamic society, right, and you try to ignore the divine law and you're not instituting that, then that's going to result in negative effects in the Islamic society. The reason why they implemented those reforms was because the Muslim society had already fallen behind technologically Western societies. We have to look at the cause of that. We have to look on the moral level. What were the actual people, everyday people doing? What was their mindset? What were the people at the top? What was their mindset? Right? And how does that relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His commands? And so we have to view history, right, from a perspective that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one in charge, and He's the one that is driving history according to set rules that He has put forward. And so now we as Muslims, finding ourselves in the 21st century, we need to take a lesson from history. We need to take a lesson from past civilizations, from other civilizations, but also from our own history, right? And to see where things go wrong, right? Now, that's not included under nationalism and arms race. For us, these are all secondary causes. They're important. They're important to mention, right? But even, for example, nationalism. Okay, what is the theological significance of nationalism? From our point of view as Muslims, nationalism is a kind of idolatry, because what you're doing is you're putting the state in the place of God, right? For Muslims, you don't just go rah, my side, my tribe versus your tribe. The Prophet came, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to free us from tribalism. So, these are all things that need to be discussed from an Islamic point of view, and we need to see the hand of God in history. If you take out the hand of God, all you're going to be left with are secondary causes and no way to draw them all together.
I think with the examples you guys are giving me, it's really helpful, even for me as a young adult. Well, I don't know if I'm young anymore, but just to see, understand our history and the impacts it has, and sort of addressing some of those identity issues that we face as Muslims, and even understanding, what contributions our history or Muslims have made in the past. I think that really reframes it. I think you guys gave very good examples. Now, for maybe an educator who's watching the show, what kind of an education system are you proposing with this new approach? Ibrahim, go ahead.
So we have to, this kind of goes a little deep.
Okay.
And so I'm going to give a kind of two-tier answer.
Sure.
The ultimate teaching model within the Islamic worldview is actually a traditional teaching model in which the character of the teacher, in a sense, emanates. There's kind of a spiritual connection between a teacher and a student, right? And that's very important from an Islamic point of view. You can't just get the deen from books. Right, it's very important to have that teacher-student relationship.
Break that down for me. When you say a teacher-student relationship from a spiritual perspective, what do you mean by that?
So what I mean is that knowledge in Islam is sacred. Okay, no matter what the subject, it's sacred because it's knowledge, right? And knowledge has a very high place in Islam. So especially when you incorporate it within the supernatural worldview, the worldview that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the cause of all things, that He's the ultimate end of all things and so forth. All of knowledge gets kind of subsumed under this sacred umbrella, okay? When that happens, the teacher of knowledge themselves, in a sense, is passing on something sacred. There's a sacred relation. The student who's seeking that knowledge is also engaged in something sacred. Right? We have many ahadith about how somebody who seeks knowledge, the angels pray for their forgiveness and so on and so forth. Now, obviously this applies first and foremost to strictly religious knowledge, meaning the Quran and the Sunnah and the derivative sciences. Yes, that's true. But also, right, these other sciences, if we understand how they all fit under this sacred umbrella, they also get a share of that. Right? Now, so there is that relationship. Right, in which sacred, there's something sacred being passed on. And the ultimate goal of knowledge in Islam is actually to transform the individual, to make them more God-fearing, right, to get them closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Also, what I would like to add, some people, when you talk to them about, incorporating Islam, they think you want to redefine the force of gravity or something. That's not what we're trying to do. That we understand that there is a limit on integrating Islam into certain subjects, but that limit is not zero. And we must remember that today's science books, the so-called physics and so on, they are, yes, for political correctness reasons, they do not advocate atheism and staunch secularism, but they do nudge a person to think in atheistic terms. Even though there are, for example, obvious elements of intelligent design all around us, right? We are never taught the perspective of the presence of intelligent design in biology or physics, right? So actually, by not incorporating the divine hand into these subjects, you're actually stating that there is no divine hand. Now, also, it is important to understand that when we study contemporary sciences, they are composed of data, and data is interpreted. It's not like the values and the perspective and the worldview of the scientist who writes science textbooks becomes part and parcel of the textbook.
The problem regarding physics specifically is actually, in fact, even deeper than that. Because this is something that even most Muslims, especially Muslims who've studied science, but they haven't studied the traditional sciences, theology and so forth. They haven't, this is something that they would find objectionable, but which would require, really an in-depth discussion to really show. But there's an even deeper problem with physics, which is this. Basically, what it does is this. Like, let's say you have reality, right? Like right now you have an observation. Let's say I'm looking at this chair or what have you. Now, this chair in my mind has certain qualities, right? It has color, it has an aesthetic quality, it has a whole host of, size, shape, so on and so forth. Some of these are quantifiable. So for example, the length of the chair or whatever, that's quantifiable. Something like the color is not really quantifiable, it's qualitative. So you have qualitative qualities and quantitative qualities. What the scientific worldview, which emerged in the 16th century did, and the 17th century did, is it told people that, look, even though you're seeing this chair and it's one thing, really what's really true about it is only the things that you can quantify, the things that are qualitative, beauty, meaning, purpose, right? Increasingly the vast majority of things we care about, right? Happiness, love, so on and so forth. These are called secondary qualities. They're only in your head. And the primary qualities that are actually out there in reality are only the things that you can quantify with mathematical equations. This is an incredibly problematic viewpoint from an Islamic perspective. From our perspective, it's actually the exact opposite. What you're seeing is a reality. It's not the whole of reality, because the Quran says, for example, يُسَبِّحُ لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. All that is in the heavens and the earth sings the praises of God. So unless you're somebody that's spiritually enlightened, you're not seeing reality at its highmost level, but you are seeing reality. And what physics does, which is to say, actually, this whole thing is just really a bunch of quantum fields that are things, that is actually, in a sense, a relative perspective. That's a relative perspective. What they're telling us is, no, that's the primary perspective, and what you're seeing is a relative perspective. Right? And so this requires an in-depth philosophical discussion, or at least one that can be brought down to the understanding of, let's say, a beginner student in science, to understand, yes, this is important, right? Because being able to mathematize and quantify nature allows you control over nature, because it's predictable, you can map it out, but it's not the whole of reality. And what you're seeing is not just an illusion of the mind, to say that, yes, beauty is not something that exists objectively in the world. Beauty is just something subjective in the human mind.
I could probably go on forever about these examples, but will. Just as we wrap up, tell me a little bit about the organization that you're both working on and how you have these resources available for people who might be interested. So,
so
start with you.
After teaching for a few years, I've taught in a couple of Muslim countries. I've seen that for people, Islam has become just a ritual. You know, Islam is the intellectual. There is very little young people today find in terms of spiritual and intellectual fulfillment in Islam. So for them, Islam says on how to make wudu and how to say prayers before you sleep and so on.
So what do you do? What are you guys doing to change that?
So what we do is we create teaching resources for teachers. We try to link it to national curriculums for all subjects, and we try to integrate an Islamic perspective into them. This shortens the time preparation for teachers, because in Islamic schools today, if they find material from mainstream corporations, for various subjects, they have to spend hours trying to integrate an Islamic perspective to the research and so on. Obviously, they're not paid enough to do it, and they don't have the time. And this creates a quality gap. We're trying to close that quality gap. So if people visit our website, www.Activaql.ca, they will see some of our sample materials, and that's simple for any teacher to take and use in their classroom.
And so far, you guys have received positive feedback from some of the schools that you've reached out to in Ontario?
Alhamdulillah, yes.
Alhamdulillah, we have done a project for an As-Sadiq Islamic school in Vaughan for their grade 9. It was also a learning curve for us. We've learned from it. And so far the schools, because when you talk about Islam, integrating Islam into various subjects, many people, like I said, they don't really grasp what it means. They think you want to redefine the multiplication table or come up with a new formula for the force of gravity. So this barrier has to be broken, but I think it is being broken in a positive way. And more schools understand that hiring our services would actually significantly improve the quality of education at their institution.
I think this was definitely a very enlightening conversation for me, and I hope for viewers as well. So thank you both for taking time out and coming on our show.
Thank you for having us.
Hey YouTube, we hope you benefited from this video. If you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, check out some of our other videos. And don't forget to subscribe so you can get new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.